Hi, my name is Robert. Please read the comments in the About section of this video. It has valuable information and updates. My YouTube channel has a disclaimer video that I encourage you to watch. And please like, share, and subscribe. I hope you found what you're looking for. Thank you very much for watching. I'm about to head over to the Raspberry car and replace the turbo on it. But in the meantime, I'm going to check my oil before I leave. It's been sitting a couple of hours. When I get there with it running, and 5 minutes after I shut it down, just to see what the different levels will be. Just a tad over the full line, so let me see what it is once I get to where I'm going. About a 5-minute drive. Checking the oil with the engine running, it's down about a half a quart. So it seems like about a half a quart, maybe a little more, is what's being circulated through the engine while it's running. Car's been sitting about 5 minutes, and as you can see, it's just a little bit over the full mark, which is where it was pretty much when I checked it before I did my little draft. So moves very little after you've run it, but while it's running, it's down about a quart below where it is when it's static. Somebody sent me a registered package to my P.O. box from a zip code 70669, certified mail letter. One of two things: either somebody's sending me a bill for some bad advice I gave them, or somebody's leaving me an inheritance. And unfortunately, I was out of town and didn't get back in time to pick up this mail, so the post office sent it back. I didn't have a chance to put a hold on my mail because somebody had drove through the post office and it was closed 2 days before I left. At any rate, maybe they'll send it again. I have the Raspberry T5 with me. It's really having some issues with oil consumption. It's smoking most of the time, even while it's rolling, which to me is more than likely the turbo. And it's using about a quart of oil every 300 miles. Now, the owner was toying around with oil weight. I don't know if that's got anything to do with it. At any rate, the car's got about 118,000 miles. To me, that's kind of low to have a bad turbo. But we had the turbo pulled out and rebuilt by a guy locally, and we're still having the oil consumption issues. So I'm going to move it, put it on ramps. Hopefully it'll cool down quick enough so that I can pull the turbo and replace it with another one, just in case it's the turbo, because the compression's good, hot and cold, and it's either the turbo, the rings, or oil ring on a cylinder, or it could be valve stem seals, which were replaced at about 105 a year ago, so I doubt it's that. At any rate, let me move it so I can open it up, let it start cooling off, because as soon as you start it, you have hot exhaust going through that turbo, and the quicker I get it cooled off, the quicker I can pull it. So basically, you start the car. As soon as you start it, you get no smoke, no puff during startup or anything like that. You let the car sit idle for a couple of minutes and you get light smoke. You drive it around, it's just a steady stream of light smoke. You drive it 10, 15, 20 minutes and you stop somewhere. It'll smoke a little bit, and then you let it sit 3 or 4 minutes and it starts smoking pretty decent, where, you know, it'll turn your head. My car smokes, but it's not that bad, and it's definitely not losing oil. So the coolant's clean. There's no oil rising in there. Oil's not going there. I think it's going out of the tailpipe for some reason. And like I said, we checked compression. It was about 150 across the board, except for number 2 was a little low. It was like 143. And then we checked it again hot, and it was about 150, 153 across the board. Number 2 was a little higher. It was about 10 higher. I think my compression gauge may be a little low. It's just an inexpensive gauge. So if I had to guess, I'd say my gauge is about 10 psi low. Now, every cylinder in an engine has 2 compression rings, which are metal, and it has an oil ring, which is rubber, of course. It is possible to lose one of those, which will cause you to blow oil by, and it'll especially blow oil into the combustion chamber. And the mechanic I talked to said the best way to check that, of course, is to see a lot of oil in the piston and have low compression on a dry start early, first thing in the morning after the car's been sitting several hours. You normally have low compression in that cylinder, and then you'll have high compression in that cylinder when it's warm. We're not having that scenario. The second possibility is a turbo, which this turbo was worn. It was blowing oil out of the front and back, but it's been rebuilt, and the oil consumption continues, so we're just going to double check the turbo. Another option would be if somehow valve stem seals are bad already, which is unlikely, but it is possible. Some mechanics will pull the intake manifold off and look at the valves through the intake ports, see if there's oil on any of the valves. That would indicate maybe bad valve stem seals on the intake side. On the exhaust side, because of the way the engine pivots, sometimes bad valve stem seals will actually cause oil to leak out of the back side of the engine, out past the exhaust manifold, and we don't see any oil dripping anywhere. This is probably the only P80 Volvo that has absolutely no oil leaking anywhere. This thing is as dry as they get. So I'm going to take a chance, pull the turbo, see if there's any oil on the back side of it. And I'm going to pull the O2 sensor, see if it's wet with oil. I know the exhaust seems to be a little wet, but yeah, it's smoking. Well, here's the exhaust. It's not exactly wet, but you know, it has its accumulation of soot there, and we just need to find out why this thing is going through a quart of oil every 300 miles. I pulled this turbo out of the salvage yard. Just about no play in it when you wiggle the exhaust turbine. It spins nice and smooth. The turbine, as you can see, is grayish with ash, which indicates that it's burning exhaust gases. I think if it was leaking or something, there would be a lot of black soot on there, which it's not. The wastegate was bad on that turbo, so I removed that wastegate and installed another one that is good. Well, I pulled that tube off, and I do have some oil on it there. It don't look bad down in there. Also, the bypass valve line is off of it. That wouldn't matter on any oil leak, but that's just an observation. Somehow somebody has crushed the filter and has the filter bent out of the box properly, so I'll need to try to get that set back down in there properly. I got this oil off the bottom of the intake, and there's some inside the intake of the turbo. I disconnected the lines and unplugged the PTC valve and pulled the intake out, and as you can see, there seems to be some oil in that tube as well. Normally the oil that gets into that part of the intake is coming from the PCV system. The hose that connects there is normally blowing oil into the front of the turbo. Since I've been catching oil in my drain pan and I want to use it to catch coolant and reuse it, I put some oil eater cleaner degreaser into the oil pan, slosh it around, then rinse it out so that I can catch the coolant. Other than that, I would get oil residue in my coolant. So this is the rebuilt turbo and how it's spinning. And here's the turbo I pulled out of the salvage yard, how it sounds, and it's spinning. Doesn't spin near as long. I could be wrong, but it also seems like this wastegate is busted. it's flapping around making noise, and it's hard to pull out. And when I pull it out, put my thumb over the hole, it goes back in without any effort, and it's not creating any kind of suction or anything. So I think this weight gate may be bad as well. Before you install the turbo, you should check the bypass valve, make sure it can build boost. And when I pulled this one out, it looks like the diaphragm is torn. Just when I took it out, I could see it looked like a cut in it. Let me get it out of here and let you see if it's got a tear in it. Okay, I got the diaphragm out, and as you can see daylight through it. So this one is torn. I'm going to take the one out of the turbo I'm removing, make sure it's good, and then put this stuff back together. I'm probably going to put some oil eater on it and clean it up some before I throw it back on. The diaphragm in it looks new, so I'm going to put that one on this turbo after I clean it up a little bit and get this bolted on. I used my oil eater spray bottle and cleaned off this turbo. Came pretty clean. And here's my 3 ports. I have my wastegate up here, my bypass valve there, and my pressure valve there. This goes to the red on your BCS. This goes to the yellow on the BCS, and the blue goes to the intake tube, and this bypass goes around to the intake. Push this into the exhaust flange. The trick with this is make sure it's not binding in the exhaust flange, and before you tighten it up, there's a little pin in the exhaust flange that goes in that little hole there. I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but I'll show you the pin here in a second. The line going to the pressure tube down the bottom is broken, so that must have been brittle. When I pulled it loose, it probably broke. So I'm going to go ahead and hook up a fresh silicone hose to that before I drop this turbo down there. It'll be easier to secure it on while I have the turbo out. Just a reminder, that is not the proper hose for this connection. The coolant comes off that turbo down this tube, hundreds and hundreds of degrees. A turbo can get 1900 degrees when it's really working hard. The coolant hits this tube and it's cooling down, not a whole lot till it hits this, and then it takes a turn back down to the motor where the water pump sends it to the radiator. But this hose really should be the proper insulated hose from Volvo, not any other hose. They just won't last long, and this one was leaking when I seen it when the car got here. So tightened up best I can. I don't have the proper hose with me. It's on order. Once we get it in, we'll replace this one. I got the rest of my heat shield on, my coolant line tightened, all my lines tightened over there, my tubing in, my air box in, my throttle body cover on. Everything's ready to go. I closed up the drain line on the bottom of the radiator. Now I'm going to top off the coolant, start the vehicle, let it warm up, and put the rest of the coolant in, and it should be good to go, not smoking. I have as much coolant in the bottle as it'll take right now, and I still have about 12 to 16 ounces in my catcher. So I'm going to start the car, let it idle with that lid off. Hopefully when the thermostat opens up and the air gets out of the system, I could pour the rest of that coolant in there. So far, no smoke, which is what it was doing. It was smoking after it was running for a little while. So I'm going to let it run for a little while, hopefully suck that coolant down, take it on the test drive, and double check it for smoke. This car is still smoking, so maybe it's not the turbo. I'm going to drive it around for a little bit and see if it's still losing oil, but I suspect it is. It should have stopped smoking by now. I've driven about 2 or 3 miles. So let me drive it home. Actually, I only drove about 1 mile. Let me drive it home, still see if it's still smoking when I get home. Drove a couple miles, come to a stop. It's not smoking right now. Let me let it sit a minute or two, see if it starts smoking. Okay, I'm starting to see a little bit of light smoke from the exhaust again. Let me pump the gas and see if I get a good puff out the back here. Yes, I'm getting smoke, so I'm assuming it's something internal on the engine since it's blowing on 2 turbos. And I guess that black soot on the back of that turbo is because all of the exhaust, which would be oil soaked, is hitting the back of that back turbine. Alright, I contacted my mechanic about the turbo I replaced on this vehicle, and he told me that if that exhaust was full of oil, especially the cat, that it may take a little bit of driving to get this thing to stop smoking. I've only driven about 3.5 miles, maybe 4. So tomorrow I'll drive it around some, and maybe I'll put about 150 miles or so on it and see if the smoking stops. The owner told me it's using about a quart every 300 miles, and I put it 1x below the full mark. So I'll check the oil again here before I start it up next time, and then I'll drive a couple 100 miles and check the oil again. If you feel that this information was useful, please like it and share it with your social media friends. You can subscribe to my channel so that you will get notifications of future videos that I post. You can follow me on Twitter, and if you need to contact me directly, please visit my website. And if you have any questions, leave them below, and someone or myself will reply to them. Again, thank you very much for watching.